Hey guys, so I thought I would just go ahead and walk you through this environmental issues PowerPoint. I think it'll be much more helpful for you. In the physical features PowerPoint, you guys had some questions about, where to find some things and things like that. And you started Googling answers, and I don't really like when you do that because it doesn't necessarily give you the answer that I want. So I'm going to kind of walk you through this. Now you should have your chart pulled up as well. And your chart should look very similar to the charts that we've done in the past. It should say like the topics such as water, pollution, and unfair distribution, and then it has causes and effects. So I'm going to walk you through each of those pieces. I'm going to underline and highlight, as I always do, what it is that I need you to know. All right, so hopefully this will be easier for you. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. So Africa's environmental issues, there are a couple of them. The first one, and probably the biggest one that we've talked about so far, especially with yesterday's assignment, which was talking about the unequal distribution of water, where you read the story about Natalia who had to walk to get water. That's kind of the same thing that we're talking about here. And even then, it's probably not the cleanest water on the planet. Um, Now, Africa has always been vital to Africa. The oceans, rivers, and seas have allowed Africa to engage through trade. These interactions around these bodies of water have created certain cities to be able to be really central for trade. But the problem is, water doesn't run through every place in Africa. Um, it's very um, it's very difficult to find a lot of cities that have fresh water, which is what's important for drinking and things like that. Now, the cities that do have a lot of water, a lot of fresh water, are very successful. But the countries that don't have access to fresh water are typically the poorer countries. This is a graph that basically shows freshwater availability. So the bluer the country, the more access to fresh water that they have. The yellower it gets, that's how more scarce the water is, meaning there's not a lot of it. Notice most of the yellow is concentrated in Africa and then the Middle East, which we've also talked about, especially Saudi Arabia and Jordan and things like that. But noticed a lot of northern Africa is very scarce for water, which is because of the Sahara Desert that we've already talked about. And then Eastern Africa as well. There's just not a whole lot of fresh water that runs through it, which is crazy because you think about, them being on the coast and how they have access to seawater. But again, that's not fresh water. You can't drink that. We talked about how in Saudi Arabia, they're creating those desalination plants, which are used to take the salt out of water. But again, those are very, very expensive. Countries with large river systems have enough water for farming and for people in village towns and cities. However, the majority of Africa has trouble getting enough water for people to survive. Most African countries have very little clean water for drinking and washing, which is exactly building off the story that you read yesterday about Natalia. This is just kind of a zoomed in map of Africa about the water scarcity. You can take a minute to look at that. If you ever need to want to look more than what I'm showing you, you can always pause the video so that way you can look more into it than what. Many people who live in rural areas of Africa typically don't have running water or plumbing in their homes. So this is the first thing that you need to know for. Let me go back. This is the first thing that you need to know for the causes is they don't have running water or plumbing in their homes. And I actually can't. I actually can't underline it like I thought I could, but it's okay. So the first bullet point there says they don't have running water or plumbings in their home. That's what you need to put down. That's the first bullet. That's one of the causes of them having unequal distribution because they don't have running water or plumbings in their home, so they have to walk there to get it. This has caused serious economic problems for many African countries. And again, if I'm going too fast for you to write down, pause it, write down what you need to write, and then move on. And then you can play it and move on. So this is an example, and this kind of reminds me of the article that you just read, right? Look at these people getting water. And notice it's really not even that clean of water. We say it is fresh water for them to be able to drink and things like that, but just imagine that's the water that these people are having to drink. It's not fresh, clean water like you get out of our rivers and things like that here. It is water that is very unclean, and that's what they're having to drink. Because fetching water is so time consuming, women are unable to work and children don't have time to go to school. A lack of education and employment leads to a low GDP and slow economic growth. Many Africans cannot escape circles of poverty. That's what, again, exactly what you read in the article about Natalia. She wasn't able to go to school because she had to go get water. This is just another example of kids who should be in school, but they're not because they're having to go get water. And again, look at um, the cleanliness of the water, or lack thereof. There really is no cleanliness of the water. This is bullet number 2 that you need to put for causes of water pollution is droughts. It's the first bullet. There are long periods of very little rainfall. So when there are droughts, that makes the water problem even worse in Africa because the rivers have started to dry up and things like that. When the rains do not come, crops wither away and livestock die. So that also affects their farming ability as well. Their crops can't get the water that they need, which hurts them because of the food, and then livestock as well. People who live in areas affected by drought often face famine and begin to die of starvation. Many countries in Africa do not have enough clean water, even the ones that have large rivers. African countries have the problem of increasing pollution from factories and contamination from animals and human waste. So, this is the last bullet that you need to put in causes. And it is that second bullet point there, that pollution from factories and contamination from animals and human waste. That is a big reason why the water is the color that it is that we've just shown in the pictures, is because of the pollution from the factories. They just dump all their chemicals and all their waste into the river, as well as animals and human. Again, if you don't have running water or plumbing in your home, where are you going to go to the bathroom? In the river, just like we talked about in India and the Ganges River and things like that. Same kind of deal in Africa. Now we're moving on to the effects section of water pollution and unequal distribution. Clean water is needed for basic health and sanitation, but again, the problem is a lot of them don't get it. Lack of clean water to wash with increases the frequency of skin and eye infections. So that is the first bullet point that needs to go in effects, is the skin and eye infections. That's what it causes. People who are not able to have access to clean water are at risk for many waterborne diseases that spread by parasites. So that is the second bullet point you need to put in effects, is that they are at risk for many waterborne diseases. At risk for many waterborne diseases. This is, again, just an example of some of the rivers that have been polluted. Notice just the trash and things like that in there. Millions of Africans are hospitalized yearly from ingesting unsafe water. Sick people are unable to work, which negatively impacts the economy. Also, unclean drinking water is the leading cause of death for thousands of children in Africa. Local industries that depend on water sources have been devastated by water pollution. This is the last bullet point you need to write in effects, and it is the middle one. So, water pollution either kills fish or makes them unsafe to eat. And it also kills livestock as well. So, a lot of these animals that they eat become unable to eat them because of the pollution and things like that. The fish and the livestock get diseases, so that makes them unable to be eaten, because then if the people eat them, then they are going to get sick. So that not only kind of ramps up the starvation for the people, but also think about the people who do this for a living. People who herd livestock for a living, people who trade livestock for a living. They can't do that now because the animals are getting sick and dying. Overpopulation and poor sanitation have made life along Africa's water sources difficult. Some countries in Africa have tried to improve their economies by building factories. Unfortunately, that doesn't help because the factories just then pollute the river, which causes all these other kinds of issues. All right, moving on to the next section, which is deforestation. As Africa's population increases and nations try to develop economically, deforestation has become a growing concern. Deforestation is the process of forests being destroyed to make way for human development. Deforestation is a major issue. So we talked about this last year when you talked about the Amazon rainforest, and we talked about how a lot of it was being cut down because of making way for more people in Brazil. They were getting more people, the cities were expanding, and also money making as well. So deforestation is just cutting down the forest, is essentially what it is. All right, so bullet point number one for causes of deforestation, and that is commercial logging. A main cause of deforestation in Africa today is commercial logging. So commercial just means for business, it means for profit. So they are logging for a profit. And then the timber, which is the logs, is exported all over the world and helps boost the economy of many African countries. So that's great. That's how they're making money. That has helped a lot of poor African nations make money is by cutting down trees and selling them for like to build furniture and homes and things like that. The only problem is it is greatly destroying their environment. So again, you need to know the first bullet point there. A main cause of deforestation is commercial logging. This is an example of it, and you can kind of see. You can see how there are sort of squares that have been cut down, and those have been from deforestation. So these areas go in, they set off a certain block area, and then they will then cut down all the trees in that certain area. And then sometimes they'll replant them, which you can kind of see happening a little bit, but then in some cases they won't. Another reason Africans are cutting down so many trees is population growth. In the last 50 years, Africa's population has tripled to over 1.2 billion people. That's a lot of people to triple in just 50 years. So, what you need to know again for bullet point number two under causes of deforestation is the last bullet point there, which is cities have grown and cleared large areas of forests for housing. You need to know that cities have grown and have cleared large areas of forests for housing. So they are cutting them down to expand their city to be able to build houses for people to live in, which again is not a bad thing. It's just that it is tearing down their forests. There's another picture. Many of the rainforests that have once ran in Africa are already gone. Nigeria is losing its rainforest at the fastest rate. The United Nations estimates that Nigeria has lost about 55% of its original forests to logging, clearing the land, and cutting trees to use as fuel. Since the 1990s, more than 90% of West African rainforests have been cut down. This is just another example. All right, moving on to the effects box for deforestation. The effects, you're going to have 3 bullet points here. As the number of trees shrinks, so does the amount of oxygen produced. Meanwhile, the amount of harmful carbon dioxide in the air increases. So what you need to know, the first bullet point is the first bullet point under effects. So the first bullet point you need to write down is the number of trees shrinks, so does the amount of oxygen produced. Your second bullet point you need to put is this second bullet point on, or it was the second main bullet point on the slide. So the second thing you need to write down is less rainforest could also mean fewer medicines. We talked about that when we did the debate about the Amazon rainforest last year, about how a lot of the plants and things like that are used for modern medicines. So if you cut down all the rainforest, that's then less medications that we have. And then the last bullet point you need to know and the last bullet point you need to write down is deforestation also leads to extinction of species of both plants and animals. So you're getting rid of their habitats, you're getting rid of their homes, and that's leading to a lot of plants and animals to become extinct. All right, and then moving on to our last section of desertification. Desertification. The Sahel is one part of Africa that is experiencing severe problems with this. The process of the desert expanding into areas that have formerly been farmland. So basically, desertification is just when the desert is expanding into other areas. So when the desert starts to become drier and drier, the wind will then spread it to, and it'll spread the sands to other areas. So basically, area that was savanna or was farmland is now slowly becoming more desert. As the land is overused, the soil becomes poor and powdery, and the winds coming from the Sahara gradually blow the topsoil away, leaving a barren and rocky land that loses its ability to hold water. Now, there are a few reasons for this, and there are a few reasons why this happens. There's a picture of what, again, desertification looks like. Desertification in Africa is caused by, and then it lists 4 bullet points. You need to write down all 4 of those bullet points. Now, if you would like to summarize those 4 bullet points, you are welcome to. You don't have to write them word for word, but you need to know all 4 of those bullet points that are on desertification in Africa. So the first one is poor farming practices. The second one is people cutting down trees that should help hold the soil in place, so erosion, and that goes back to the whole deforestation and logging. Animals being allowed to graze too heavily in an area and stripping the vegetation from the soil. So they're allowing the animals to basically eat all of the grass. And then now that there's no grass left, it's becoming a desert. And then people are draining the surface and underground water for industry and farming. So they're basically draining all of the groundwater and all the water that is there, and even underneath of the water underneath the surface. They're using that to irrigate their crops and homes and things like that, which again is not a bad thing, but they're using it too much. And that is causing the area to become less watered and turning into a desert. So again, you need to know all 4 of those bottom bullets. And then lastly, the effects. The survival needs of the people living are there are clear, but they are destroying major parts of their environment in the process. So basically, what that's saying is these people are doing it for a reason. They're doing it to survive. They're doing what they have to do. They have to graze their livestock. They have to use the water for farming. They have to do those types of things. The problem is it's really destroying their environment. Africans who have lived for generations by farming and raising and grazing animals are finding less and less land available to them. The people who live in these areas often face starvation and poverty. So that bullet point right there, the third bullet point, that is the major effect that I need you to know. That's the only effect I need you to know, is the people who live in these areas often face starvation and poverty. So what are some of the solutions that they're trying to do? Now, it's not like they're just not doing anything about it. They're trying. Again, the problem is they're doing what they have to do to survive. Now, what are they doing to try to fix the issue? Some Africans work hard to try to replant trees. And they try to build windbreaks to keep out the sand and push back the desert. So they're basically trying to build walls so that way when the wind blows the sand, it's actually hitting the wall instead of getting into the farmland, which is helpful. The problem is that costs money. In many parts of Africa, this has become a losing battle, and the desert claims more land each year. In recent years, the United Nations have come to the aid of those living in parts of the Sahel. They have worked to find solutions to help the people survive and live a better life. But again, it's just really difficult. All right, that is it. This is what your chart should look like. So you should have the causes and effects filled out. You don't have to do the illustration unless you can figure out how to, if you want to like insert a picture, I guess you're more than welcome to. But again, you are uploading this to me, so you don't need to print it out or anything like that. So this document should have been editable. So you typed in the cause and effects, and then you should upload this back to me as your work session for the day. If you have any questions about anything on the PowerPoint, please feel free to reach out. We are more than happy to answer your questions. Other than that, Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope this helped. If it didn't help, please let me know, or if there's something that I can do to help you in the future, please let me know. If this did help, also please let me know, and I'll continue to make these for when we do PowerPoints and things like that. Other than that, peace.